Welcome to another episode of Dime Time. This time we are reviewing the number 2 seed San Antonio Spurs versus the number 7 seed Memphis Grizzlies in the West. This would have been an emotional season for the Spurs. They lost Duncan to retirement. Now, Duncan was just not any Spur. Duncan was the Spur. Duncan was the soul of the Spurs. The reason the Spurs are the Spurs today is because of what Duncan stood for. He was devastatingly excellent and exceptional as a player, but surprisingly humble. It was the reason that it was because he took those pay cuts that they managed to stay relevant all these years. They managed to sign good, great character players. He led the Spurs. So it was completely acceptable if the Spurs kind of whittled down and broke down and probably finished maybe 5th, 6th in the West. But no, the Spurs actually did better. They actually pulled off their first 60-win season back-to-back ever. Kawhi Leonard has unsurprisingly become one of the 5 best players in the NBA, both offensively and defensively, and has a very, very strong case for MVP if it were not for the ridiculous numbers that both Harden and Westbrook put up. But despite all their greatness, the Spurs have some chinks in their armor. Parker, Ginobili, LaMarcus Aldridge, Gasol are all on the wrong side of 30. Sure, Patty Mills, Danny Green, young players have some playoff experience, but largely the rest of the Spurs are terrifyingly young. If Kawhi Leonard isn't hitting his shots, then the Spurs don't have a solid secondary option. There are times when they are not firing offensively all together as a unit, and that's when the Spurs have the biggest problem. Also, they have a huge problem against teams that are bigger in the paint, and that is exactly what the Memphis Grizzlies are. The good news for the Spurs in all this, despite all the chinks in their armors, is that young bench that I was speaking about, those guys were the number 1 ranked defensive bench and the number 5 ranked offensive bench in the league this season. That has to be refreshing for Greg Popovich. Defensively, there is no doubt the San Antonio Spurs are sound. They've always been sound. But it's offensively that if they take care of business, then they can look to make or manage to eliminate the Memphis Grizzlies in round 1. Coming to the Grizzlies, it was a super expensive offseason for these guys. First, they forked out $153 million for a 5-year contract for Mike Conley. That is the most expensive contract signed till this date in the NBA. That is understandable, right? On a given day, first of all, Mike Conley on any given day is a top 10 point guard in the NBA. And on some days, he can be even a top 5 point guard. But the other contract just didn't make any logical sense. They forked out $94 million for 5 years of Chandler Parsons. Chandler Parsons, the guy who kept getting injured. Sure, Parsons is the top 20 forward when he's healthy, but the problem is he's not stayed healthy since he left Houston. This is a forward who's been struggling with injuries for the past few seasons. So to fork out that much money for a guy like him made absolutely no sense. Yes, it was a high risk, high reward situation. If Chandler Parsons is healthy, then he automatically takes care of a bunch of troubles that the Memphis Grizzlies have. One of the troubles being the inability to space their flooring with somebody who can shoot consistently well from the 3-point line. But a couple of things happened in the season that kind of negated or didn't really make sense for the Chandler signing. One is Marc Gasol developed a 3-point shot, a very, very reliable 3-point shot. So automatically now they have a big man who can play both inside and play outside. So Chandler Parsons' situation there kind of gets negated. Another thing that Chandler Parsons brought to the table was his ability to create his own shot. But assuming that Mike Conley stays healthy, the improvement in shooting both from Marc Gasol and JaMychal Green kind of negates that, because Mike Conley, when healthy, can control the entire offense, and because he doesn't have the burden of scoring or carrying the team, he can play far longer extended minutes for the Grizzlies than almost any other point guard on a playoff contender. With Parsons, it was understandable. The Grizzlies are a small market team. They're not a team loaded with stars. They were hoping that instead of getting one big star, which has been really, really difficult for them to lure, right? They'd get Parsons and create a stack of stars that will make them a lucrative team for both national television and for their own fans. And it's understandable. Yes, it was, like I mentioned earlier, it was a high risk, high reward situation. If Parsons healthy, the Memphis Grizzlies hit a top 4 seed. But he didn't turn out to be healthy. And that is going to cost the Grizzlies, because the Grizzlies are a mid-level team, right? They're not a top 4 team. They're not a bottom 4 team. So they're not going to be able to attract the kind of superstar talent that they should be, and they're never going to draft high. They're never going to pick high enough in the draft to attract a potential franchise player from there. So the Memphis Grizzlies need to be smart with whatever contracts they sign. And in my opinion, the Parsons contract was not a smart one. And to make matters worse, Parsons suffered a season-ending injury. So now the Grizzlies spent all that money and don't even have Parsons for the playoffs. Coming to the head-to-head matchup, these two teams split the games. Memphis 1-2, San Antonio 1-2. And despite their average playoff ratings, no one wants to see the Grizzlies in round one. Why? Because they are physical. Even if you beat them in 6 games, they're going to leave you so bruised and battered for the next round. It becomes harder for you to compete as you go deeper into the playoffs. Both teams still have conventional big men who can pound the ball, whether it is the Grizzlies having Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol, or the Spurs having LaMarcus Aldridge and Pau Gasol. And as mentioned earlier, the Spurs, despite all their greatness, have chinks in their armor that the Memphis Grizzlies can exploit. Both are defensive-minded teams that will make it difficult for the opponent to score the ball. Both have problems at times scoring the ball. This is going to be a masterclass. This series is going to be a masterclass in the defensive mindset. A very important part of the playoffs is when the game is on the line in the playoffs, teams need to have somebody to look upon to take that last shot. The Spurs have a clear winner, right? The Spurs understand that Kawhi Leonard is the man who's going to get the ball. But the Grizzlies don't. Does the ball go to Conley? Does the ball go to Gasol? If the ball's going to Gasol, Gasol cannot bring the ball up. Conley has to bring the ball up. So if you take all those things into consideration, the Spurs clearly has somebody who can take the ball in close games. And that, for me, creates the edge for the Spurs here. Of course, in general, the Spurs are the better team, but the Grizzlies are going to pound the hell out of the Spurs. They're going to beat them up before they send them to the next round. All in all, I think this is going to be a hard-fought series for the Spurs, but the Spurs will prevail. The Spurs in 6. Thank you for watching. If you think you got something better to say, leave it in the comments, and definitely check out my other playoff predictions.